You're not here by accident. There is a silent conflict unfolding inside millions of emotionally exhausted adults. A conflict so deeply rooted that most don't even realize it's operating within them. On one side, there's a profound longing to be seen, to matter, to rest, to finally breathe in one's own life. On the other side, there's a powerful, invisible force, an internalized belief that putting yourself first is wrong, dangerous, or even shameful. This isn't merely behavioral. It is the consequence of deep emotional and ancestral patterns that Carl Jung called the shadow. Those repressed, disowned parts of the psyche, needs, desires, instincts, we were conditioned to suppress just to emotionally survive in our earliest environments. For many, self-prioritization touches an ancient wound. If I take care of myself, I might lose love. If I choose myself, I might be abandoned. The persona, the socially acceptable mask Jung described, develops precisely to protect us from this fear. We become experts at adapting, pleasing, sacrificing, and over time we forget who we truly are behind the roles we play. This adaptation often begins in childhood. Alfred Adler observed how children quickly compensate for feelings of insignificance by becoming indispensable, through caretaking, obedience, or attunement to the emotional needs of their parents. The child believes, if I meet everyone's needs, I will be safe. If I'm good enough, I will finally be loved. But this bargain comes at a terrible cost: chronic abandonment of the true self. Worse still, cultural and spiritual environments often reinforce this pattern. Many religious or moral structures glorify sacrifice and self-neglect while quietly condemning self-prioritization as selfish or sinful. Guilt becomes internalized. The nervous system adapts, and the self retreats even further. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to arrive there, one must first confront the painful illusion that dissolving into others brings safety." In this video, we will expose the shocking emotional cost of never putting yourself first. We'll uncover why individuation, the lifelong psychological and spiritual process Jung identified, requires not more sacrifice, but a courageous reclaiming of your own center. Behind chronic self-sacrifice lies a wound often invisible even to the person carrying it: the trauma of self-abandonment. Many who struggle to put themselves first didn't consciously choose this way of living. It was wired into their emotional and physiological survival systems from very early on. In those early attachment experiences with caregivers, love often came with unspoken conditions. You are loved when you behave. You are safe when you meet my needs. You are worthy when you anticipate and soothe my emotions. This early conditioning teaches the child that their own needs, emotions, and desires are dangerous, potential sources of rejection or withdrawal from the caregiver. To preserve connection, the child suppresses their personal desires, not consciously, but as a survival adaptation. Carl Jung would call this the development of the false self, maintaining the illusion of relational stability at the expense of authentic identity. The child's emerging self, their instincts, emotional truth, creative impulses, gets pushed into the unconscious, forming the shadow. As adults, they develop patterns of pleasing, appeasing, and over-functioning, often believing, if I care for everyone else, I will finally feel safe and loved. But it becomes a double bind. The more they give, the more invisible they feel. The more they sacrifice, the more empty they become. Emotionally, this creates a chronic sense of invisibility, a haunting void where their essence has been exiled for so long it feels unreachable. Neurobiologically, this is often accompanied by a hyperactive attachment system, constant vigilance, scanning others' emotional states, and generalized anxiety rooted in the terror of abandonment. Even as adults, they may find themselves drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, unable to set boundaries without intense guilt, overwhelmed by the thought of saying no, terrified of being seen as selfish. What they're truly avoiding isn't conflict itself, but the primal terror of losing attachment, a terror coded long before language. The paradox is brutal. The more they abandon themselves to earn love, the less capable they become of receiving genuine intimacy, because true intimacy requires presence, not performance. Jungian metaphor: imagine a tree that from its earliest growth bends unnaturally toward the strongest winds to avoid breaking. Over time it survives, but grows twisted, its true vertical core suppressed. The twist isn't weakness, it's adaptation, but the cost is the loss of its natural, upright form. Healing requires returning to that original center, a painful yet liberating process. One of the most insidious ways self-abandonment becomes embedded is when it hides beneath the disguise of virtue. Many who struggle to put themselves first unknowingly absorbed powerful moral and spiritual messages equating self-care with selfishness. These narratives are often reinforced by religious, cultural, and even therapeutic systems that glorify sacrifice, humility, and service, but in distorted, unbalanced forms. Carl Jung warned, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism. Idealism, including spiritual idealism, easily becomes a defense against facing the shadow." The message sounds noble. Love means putting others before yourself. A good person serves, even at their own expense. Humility requires surrendering your own needs. But behind these ideals often lies an unconscious betrayal of the self. This isn't true humility, it's false humility, a psychological strategy to avoid conflict, rejection, or guilt. It becomes a form of control. If I sacrifice enough, I'll secure my place in others' hearts. I'll finally feel safe. Instead of true connection, what's built is a fragile system of emotional dependency, where worth is measured by how much one suffers or serves. The betrayal is profound. Over time, people begin to believe their needs are dangerous, sinful, or proof of moral failure. The more they repress, the more disconnected they become from their own vitality. Jung's individuation process stands in direct opposition to this self-erasure. True individuation requires integrating all parts of the psyche, including desires, instincts, and personal boundaries, as sacred elements of the self. The danger of spiritual bypassing is that it creates an illusion of moral superiority, while secretly deepening the divide between persona and shadow. One may appear peaceful outwardly, but remain inwardly fragmented, anxious, and emotionally starved. Main revelation: true spirituality does not require your disappearance. It demands your full embodiment, not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of alignment with your inner truth. Jungian metaphor: imagine a candle placed inside a glass container. The flame burns gently, but as the container closes, oxygen diminishes. The flame weakens, not for lack of will, but for lack of air. Likewise, self-neglect suffocates the soul's vitality, disguised as virtue. To restore the flame, the suffocating glass must first be removed. For many who struggle to put themselves first, the conflict isn't only internal, it's ancestral. Unknowingly, they are entangled in invisible family contracts, unconscious agreements passed down through generations, rooted in unresolved traumas, losses, and emotional deprivations. These contracts aren't written, but encoded through emotional atmospheres, unspoken rules, and family dynamics teaching. Your role is to care for others. Your needs come last. We don't talk about pain, we survive. Carl Jung described this as the collective unconscious operating within family systems. Ancient emotional patterns silently dictating roles, loyalties, and expectations, often outside conscious awareness. These invisible loyalties may arise from parents who sacrifice their own dreams, projecting unfulfilled desires onto their children, generations enduring poverty, war, or abandonment, passing hyper-responsibility as a survival strategy, cultural and religious legacies romanticizing, self-denial and martyrdom. The highly sensitive child internalizes an emotional mandate. If I carry my family's pain, I belong. If I sacrifice, I honor their suffering. This unconscious loyalty creates emotional enmeshment, where personal identity fuses with family expectations. Desiring autonomy feels like betrayal, as though choosing oneself threatens the family's survival story. The paradox, the very attempt to belong leads to self-erasure. Guilt becomes not just emotional, but existential, as if breaking the contract might unravel ancestral survival itself. Erich Neumann, a direct student of Jung, deepens this truth. The task of the child is to separate from the parental archetype, but when separation is feared or forbidden, the child remains trapped in a state of pre-individuation. In other words, without breaking the ancestral contract, individuation remains impossible. Healing this ancestral wound requires profound courage. To name the invisible contract, to honor the family's pain without carrying it, to understand that liberation is not betrayal, it is breaking the cycle. One must affirm, I honor my origin, but I am not obligated to repeat its suffering. Jungian metaphor. Imagine a relay race where, instead of passing the baton, each runner clings tightly to it, unwilling to let go. The baton grows heavier with each generation, loaded with accumulated fears, sacrifices, and unspoken grief. The one who heals dares to release the baton, not in dishonor, but in freedom, allowing the race to finally end. Even after recognizing the emotional and ancestral roots of self-abandonment, many still struggle to prioritize themselves. Why? Because the problem isn't only psychological, it's physiological. The nervous system, shaped by years of relational trauma and adaptive survival responses, becomes programmed to experience self-prioritization as threat rather than safety. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory offers a powerful framework to understand this trap. In early life, when emotional needs were inconsistently met, with anger, neglect, or rejection, the developing nervous system learned conflict equals danger, assertion equals risk, boundaries equal abandonment. To survive, the child unconsciously activates the fawn response, a survival adaptation seeking safety through appeasement, obedience, and emotional caretaking of others. This fawn response isn't a choice. It's an automatic state designed to minimize perceived threat. Over-apologizing, people-pleasing, avoiding difficult conversations, suppressing personal needs, merging with others' emotional states. Over time, the nervous system associates external peace, even at the cost of internal suffering, with survival. Any movement towards self-assertion, saying no, setting boundaries, asking for space, triggers deep anxiety, shame, or total dissociation. The tragedy is this: self-prioritization, which should feel nourishing, instead feels dangerous. Because the nervous system equates individuation with abandonment, Carl Jung saw this as the body participating in the individuation struggle. The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. Here, the pendulum swings between autonomy, which feels unsafe, and submission, which feels familiar. Even when adults intellectually grasp the importance of boundaries and self-care, their bodies freeze, collapse, or panic when attempting change. Common physiological responses include chest or throat tightness when setting boundaries, trembling or dizziness when asserting needs, gastrointestinal discomfort during conflict, emotional numbness or shutdown when saying no. This isn't weakness. It's an exquisitely intelligent survival system that once protected the child from overwhelming emotional pain. The path forward requires more than willpower. Healing this neurobiological trap involves somatic awareness, learning to monitor real-time bodily responses, nervous system regulation, breathwork, grounding exercises, and gradually practicing boundary setting. Trauma-informed therapy, safely reconnecting self-assertion with safety. True individuation means not only rescuing the self psychologically, but teaching the nervous system that safety can exist within autonomy. Jungian plus somatic metaphor. Imagine a bird raised in a cage. For years, open skies represent danger while the cage feels familiar, even comforting. One day the cage door opens. The bird trembles at the threshold, not for lack of wings, but because freedom is unknown. Healing isn't forcing flight, but slowly expanding the window of safety until the sky no longer feels terrifying. Here lies the great paradox many wounded caregivers, chronic givers, and emotionally exhausted adults struggle to comprehend. Putting yourself first isn't selfish. It's the precondition for authentic relationship. The reason is simple yet profoundly counterintuitive. You cannot offer genuine love, empathy, or presence to another while abandoning yourself. Carl Jung understood this deeply when he wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because self-acceptance means facing the rejected shadow and rescuing what was exiled for survival." Those who chronically give in relationships often believe they are offering unconditional love, but behind this apparent generosity hides hidden resentment, silent exhaustion, anxiety disguised as loyalty, fear disguised as devotion. True intimacy requires two differentiated selves, each rooted in their own center, able to engage without losing themselves in the emotional field of the other. Without this foundation, relationships devolve into enmeshed fusion, where one person disappears to preserve harmony. Over time, this leads to emotional burnout, passive-aggressive conflicts, loss of desire and vitality, unconscious manipulation driven by unmet needs. The truth is this: when you overgive to care for others, you're not loving them. You're using them to regulate your unresolved fear of disconnection. True love demands you stand fully in your own presence. From this place, your giving becomes clean, expansive, and free of hidden agendas. Individuation, as Jung defines it, isn't isolation or selfish autonomy. It's the full emergence of the self, capable of relating without collapsing into dependency or control. The individuated person can say, "I can love you deeply, but I don't need to lose myself to prove it. I am responsible for my needs and trust you to be responsible for yours. I choose connection, not survival-based attachment." Jungian pulled a relational metaphor. Imagine two trees growing side by side. If their roots entangle too tightly, they compete for resources, eventually strangling one another. But when each stands, firm in its own rooted strength, their canopies intertwine in mutual support, creating shade, shelter, and beauty, without strangling each other's foundations. At the center of this entire journey lies one simple, devastating truth. Self-abandonment is not love. It is a wound. As Gabor Mate teaches so profoundly, many patterns of chronic self-sacrifice, people-pleasing, and emotional caretaking are not signs of moral strength. They are survival strategies developed by children who learn that love must be earned through disappearance. When we must suppress our authentic self to maintain attachment, the price we pay is the loss of self. Mate writes, "The child who had to read the emotional temperature of the room, who suppressed personal needs to preserve parental approval, who learned that conflict equals danger, that child becomes an adult who cannot rest without guilt, feels unworthy of attention or care, struggles to set even the smallest boundary, develops physical symptoms of chronic stress, fatigue, and tension." Bessel van der Kolk echoes this reality. The body keeps the score. Years of self-neglect, dissociation, and emotional suppression leave marks not only on the mind, but on the body itself. Autoimmune disorders, chronic pain syndromes, anxiety and panic attacks, digestive problems, sleep disturbances. Because when your nervous system lives in perpetual fawning, freezing, or hypervigilance, the body becomes the battlefield where the war between attachment and authenticity continues. But here is the path forward. True healing is not found in further sacrifice. True healing begins the moment you say, "I no longer need to disappear to be loved." It is a profound act of individuation to choose, to claim your needs as legitimate, to honor your body signals as sacred data, to set boundaries as an expression of self-respect, not aggression, to offer love freely, not as currency, but as overflow. Carl Jung reminds us, only the person who can say no is capable of an authentic yes. You were never meant to disappear for love. You were made to exist fully, to stand at the center of your own being, and from that rooted place enter into relationships, into work, and into life itself, not as a fragment, but as a whole. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself standing in the center of a vast open field, no longer twisted by the winds, no longer trapped in the contracts of the past. Feel the ground beneath your feet, solid, steady. You are not broken, you are becoming. And from this place of rooted wholeness, life opens, not as survival, but as sacred presence.